In this episode of the Digital HR Leaders podcast, I'm delighted to welcome Kaz Hassan of Unily and Luke Farrugia of ScreenCloud. Kaz, Luke, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to get into this conversation on the importance of digital experiences in improving employee engagement and retention. But before we dive in, could you both share a little bit about your professional background, your current role, and maybe for a bit of a unique twist to start, your favourite thing about working in the field of HR. So Kaz, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Kaz, and I pretty much worked in the employee experience, employee engagement tech space my whole career, which is hopefully cooler than it sounds. But I work for a company called Unily, and we are an employee experience platform. I guess in traditional speak, people think of it as an intranet, and then some, I guess. So we kind of work with enterprises, the likes of CVS Health, Shell, Wipro, EY, these sorts of companies to engage, inspire their employees through communications as well as many other capabilities. My role specifically is actually to lead our community and industry insights. I guess I sometimes explain that as thought leadership. So I work on what is our position on things, how do we drive the product forward through thought leadership, and can we work with influencers in the space like yourself as well to further what we do as a company.
Great, thanks, Kat. And your favourite thing about working in the field of HR?
My favourite thing about working in the field of HR is probably around, I'm in the community area, and so it's probably around looking at what's happening in external society, trends around people, looking at what's gathering momentum on big social media apps and in society, and trying to understand what that might mean for people leaders. It's a really exciting time to be in the space. I feel like there's trends on workplace headlines that are hitting front page news every day, and it never used to be like that. And I quite like looking underneath those trends to understand, okay, is this going to change what that means for the workplace and the people leaders as well?
Yeah, very good. Welcome to the show, Kaz. And Luke, welcome to the show as well. Can you share a little bit about yourself, your background, and your favourite thing about working in HR and employee experience?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thanks for the intro, David. So yeah, I've been in marketing now for around 14 years. Moved into the tech industry around 7 or so years ago, having started off my career in B2C. And if we fast forward to today, I've been leading the marketing function at ScreenCloud for about, coming up 2 years. We're a digital signage platform. We've got over 10,000 customers that we help to essentially get the right information to the right people at the right time using the screens on workplace walls. We're especially focused on what we call the digitally detached, probably more commonly known as frontline deskless workers. These are the types of people that just don't have access to the same comms channels and information sources as desk-based workers like ourselves. But I'm sure we'll touch on that in a bit more detail later on in the conversation. Before joining ScreenCloud, I was leading the marketing team at TrueQ, which at the time was part of the same portfolio as OrgView, who I know you're familiar with. And there we built a people analytics solution, which was powered by our HR data warehouse platform, doing some really cool stuff with people analytics teams at the likes of BAT, Microsoft, and essentially helping HR leaders to solve some of their biggest problems using data. Which I guess leads me on nicely to why I enjoy working within the field of HR now. Besides being a people person, innately invested in anything that sort of seeks to improve people's well-being and experiences, both in and outside of work environment. Obviously, HR is all about creating those optimal employee experiences. But the pandemic was a real eye-opener for me in terms of sort of my understanding of and my appreciation for how crucial HR really is and the people function are for sort of shaping the future of work. And as Kaz said, it's just a super exciting time to be involved as a vendor, as I have been for the last sort of 5 years, in providing a solution which enables people leaders to create that value for the business.
Thanks to both Luke and Kaz. And I think you both highlighted how the workplace and HR is kind of at the centre of many topics of discussion at the moment. Just this week, I saw that Jamie Dimon, the CEO at JP Morgan, probably the world's biggest investment bank, was talking about potentially moving towards a 3-day week in the future, which was quite interesting. And I think certainly what we've seen at Insight 222 over the last sort of 6 or 7 years that we've been in operation is HR's moving from its traditional role as a support function to being a more strategic partner to the business. And, that's been imbued really by, an increase in the use of people, data and insights in the HR space, but also topics such as employee experience and skills as well. Luke, given your background in marketing and given that marketing's already been on this data-driven journey, what lessons do you think that HR can take from marketing in its use of data and analytics?
Sure. Well, yeah, I think everyone's aware that marketing's undergone a quite drastic transformation probably over the last decade in particular, and especially over the last few years. We really had to pivot when the pandemic hit, and data was really the lifeblood of keeping us afloat. But I'll just give a couple of examples because there's a lot I think there's a lot that can be learned. But I think these two examples would be most sort of valuable from an HR standpoint. So my first would be around sort of A/B testing and experimentation. As I mentioned, since the pandemic, we've really had to sort of up our game, especially in terms of sort of our agility. Being able to test and react faster to buyer behaviors in order to sort of optimize our programs and campaigns and ultimately deliver and prove ROI to the business. And in fact, any marketing team who isn't really adopting this culture of experimentation is likely to already be behind their competition. And I think the same will increasingly go for HR too. So let me explain that a little bit further in the context of HR. We know there's a lot of challenges, in terms of employee retention, engagement. So it's really crucial that, we're not waiting until it's too late to change the course of action. With an experimental approach, you'll be able to sort of monitor leading indicators and course correct before it's too late. And obviously by too late, I mean, employees becoming disengaged, employees, becoming a flight risk and leaving the business, and obviously all of the losses that come with low productivity and people being off well, and mental health issues being a byproduct of that. So, experiment with different recruiting strategies, training programs, employee engagement initiatives, and then using that data to understand how they perform to then inform, how to iterate and optimize your strategies, programs, and initiatives in relation to whatever the key objectives are. And then I think the next one which is the next tip, which is very much linked to the first, is all about sort of measuring ROI, right? So, I think being able to understand what the impact is across a whole range of leading indicators is super important, right? And initially, at the moment, from a marketing perspective, we're very focused on engagement, right? So we know that yes, maybe the end goal is that we want our customer to buy or upsell, but ultimately, way before that happens, it's all about engagement. So make sure that you're very focused on a set of leading indicators that allow you to track and measure at the right time. So here we're talking stuff around productivity, employee satisfaction, and ultimately an impact on revenue to the business if we are thinking about the role that people have in supporting those revenue generating activities.
No, that's really good, Lou, and you're right. That use of people, data, and analytics in HR, does mean that it gives us as HR professionals a little bit more opportunity to start measuring the impacts of our work. It's hard, but I'm sure that was the case in marketing when marketing was getting started on this journey as well. I think there are also, turning to you, Kaz, I think there are also a lot of synergies between measuring customer experience and measuring employee experience. Certainly, when it comes to the voice of the customer in the workplace, of course, the customer is the employee. Well, not just the employee, but employee managers and everything else. So in terms of harnessing employee listening to understand your employee personas and preferred communication channels, so what are some of the innovative strategies you found in your research at Unily on the effective and maybe even non-traditional employee listening strategies that HR can employ to listen to and engage with employees more effectively?
Yeah, so when it comes to employee listening, I hopped on the trend of like looking at the ins and outs for 2024. And one of the things I put on my out list was the once a year employee engagement survey. And a lot of people ask me what I meant by that. And I think if you thinking about that marketing mindset again, if you think about what are the companies that are having the biggest impact on customers and delighting them, they're the companies like Apple and Amazon. And they don't send you a once a year survey to ask you how they're doing. They map out the customer journey and they understand at all these different touch points. How did we do here? What was the packaging like? Did we make you happy? Was the product what you expected? Now, of course, that's kind of looking at the consumer experience there, but there are synergies there that people need to understand, which is understand specifically what's working, what's not working. And yes, the once a year survey is helpful to help you benchmark, are we going in the right direction year on year? But if you're thinking of the average employee and what's going to help them stay in the role, they are typically the little things that they want to see change quickly and implemented. And I think there's a really good example that I talk a lot about with my team, which is I got a bit obsessed with the Apple TV series Ted Lasso. And they basically bring this American coach to coach a football team or soccer team if you're watching this from the US. And he has no experience of football at all. But what he does do is he builds the team up from little suggestions, anonymous tips, things like fixing the shower, which aren't massive strategic changes, but they are the little listening activities that you listen to what the team want, what the people want, and you implement them and you show that you've done that. And so, yeah, I feel like the so on my in list to kind of contrast that is like more dynamic and varied types of listening. And yes, that's tip box suggestions and little ways to improve, pulse surveys, things like that. But also looking at more like non-traditional types. We've got some customers that have worked out that when they've got a younger generation workforce coming in, that they are quite opinionated and they don't want to sit at a desk and work on an Excel spreadsheet. They see an inefficient process. They want to speak and act on it very quickly. And so they've kind of built like this whole, using the Unily platform, an ideation platform where any employee across the business can pick a business goal and say, hey, I've got this idea to help us meet this goal. And then the executives can then look through all of those ideas to understand what's popular, what's not popular, what are the most popular ideas. People have conversations around them to then say, hey, actually, our staff really know how to help us meet our goals. And that's where the cool listening is happening.
No, that's really good. And as you said, it's not just about surveys. And I think we've certainly seen companies stepping up, not just doing things once a year, which is good. And I think that particularly picked up during the pandemic. Microsoft do a daily pulse survey, for example, to 2,500 employees in its organization. That's one extreme. Workday, I know, do a weekly survey to their employees, and they get around over 70% response. So again, that's another way of doing it. But as you said, it's not just surveys. Just as if we think from a customer perspective, customer focus groups, employee focus groups, actually being on the front line, understanding ideas, and so that you can potentially implement. I think there's another one. And then we're even seeing things like network analysis as well, looking at behaviors, employee behaviors and line manager behaviors. It's quite a sophisticated bunch of tools coming together. And I guess technology is helping us to understand that at scale.
So that journey part of it, I think, is pretty cool as well, which is understanding like what are the typical journeys of employees going on, and is it that there's something in the onboarding that we can improve? Is it that parental leave, for example, understanding like the typical personalized journeys that employees are going on as well? I think it is a good part of it as well, to understand like how do we improve that process, like the marketeers do as well.
Yeah, understanding the moments that matter, I guess, Luke.
Yeah, and you're only really able to achieve that if you've got the right structure and framework and technologies to allow you to ultimately collect that data and use that data to inform, to inform how and where things are working and they're not. So yeah, really, really exciting time, but also it isn't something that you can just achieve overnight, right? It is more of a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, definitely. And what we'll do, get on to later in the conversation, we'll be talking a lot about the collection of data that helps you make decisions. We're going to talk a little bit later, Luke, with you about some of the communication tools that you can actually show that you've been listening and driving some of those actions out to your workforce. So, staying with you, Kaz, your research again at Unily shows that despite retention being a worldwide issue, and we hear a lot about great resignations and the return of the great resignation and all these other almost marketing type slogans, if you ask me. But many EX and HR professionals are putting their foot on the brakes on employee retention. Why do you think this is?
So this was a really interesting bit of data that we found. So last year, if you look at all the trends data, a lot of people said this is the year of retention over recruitment. We understand, times are tough. We need to work on keeping our workforce. And so every year we do a bit of research, and we do that research across employee experience leaders. So these are HR, internal comms, and kind of digital workplace leaders. So there are some other types of stakeholders in there. And we asked them to basically rank their list of priorities for the year. We almost didn't ask the question because we kind of thought we knew what would come out. But we did in the end. And what was so interesting about that result is what came up second from top was recruitment. So recruitment still ranking really highly. But what was most surprising, what came up dead last, so seventh on the priority list, was retention. And this just didn't make any sense to me. So I then spent some time trying to work out from the data, why would this be the case? And my analysis of that, my hypothesis is that we have a tried and tested employee recruitment blueprint. We do not have a retention blueprint that we know works. And so it's kind of sad because it kind of shows that we're adopting out with the old, in with the new approach to the workforce, which aside from going against everything we know drives high performing teams, also just seems super illogical. We want to spend the time and money to get these people in, but then not to keep them. And so what I take from that is we need to invest in understanding how do we keep people in the business? How do we retain them? It's more nuanced, of course, than recruitment because, we've had that model for a while. We know how to do it well. So it might be harder, but we need to work at it.
Yeah, and actually, that quite surprises me as well. It's almost counterintuitive, really, when we think about how hard it is to find and attract and recruit the right people into the organization and spend quite a lot of money onboarding people and getting them to be productive. And if we think that particularly if we look in countries like the UK, the supply of talent is shrinking because of demographics around things like age and everything else. So you would think, and certainly again anecdotally from the companies we talk to, retention is very high on the agenda, and we think about things like internal mobility. We think about more listening to engage and make sure that we're engaging people in the right way, understanding the moments that matter, looking at personas, as you said, just as we do with customer engagement as well. So why do you think that came in that survey? You've obviously had some hypotheses, and then maybe broadening that a little bit, Kaz, and thinking about your experience in the EX space and the research that you've been doing, obviously on a regular basis. What would you say HR need to focus on to enhance employee engagement and improve retention?
Yeah, so I said just then, I think it's about trying to understand the retention blueprint. I think one of the things that we need to be aware of there is that recruitment kind of sits in a mature domain, and clearly with people, retention is much more nuanced, and there are people that we have to bring together around certain journeys, from different parts of the organization, like internal communications, for example. A classic stakeholder that kind of needs to be brought into the loop on building out that blueprint. But after I got that result, I then started looking at other bits of research and also looking at the customer retention blueprint, looking at how people are retaining customers, how they're delivering best-in-class customer experience, and then trying to kind of map that along to employee experience. And the first big thing that came up was listening led. And I know we've touched on that a little bit, but it was just around exactly what we discussed, more dynamic and varied types of listening. The next thing that came out was I guess I would call it, and it links to that whole persona conversation, is, okay, you've got those personas. What do you now do with them? Well, you have to make sure that you target effectively, and you allow, and this is interesting, when you allow employees to take control of their experience a little bit. So the targeting is, stop using the everyone audience for your comms and your activities and engagements. There's a lot of noise in the workplace. It's about mapping out all those target audiences, ensuring that all the content, communications, engagement efforts that you have are targeted and relevant to the right people at the right time. So that's a big part of it. The personalization part is really interesting, because what we see is a kind of like Netflix type experience. Like, every person that logs into Netflix sees something different because it knows who they are, where they are. You see your top 10 in your area. You know what genres they like. And so you kind of got this like fingerprint of an experience that is built to engage me as an individual. And then those employees are using Netflix, and they come into the workplace, and you get these kind of one-to-many experiences. And so it's bringing these two things together, pointing the right comms, right engagement efforts at the right people, but also let people control what content they're interested in, what notifications they want through what channels as well. Like, when do they turn them off? Are they a mobile user? Do they want to get more through their mobile? Do they like things in their email? I certainly don't. But some people are real still wedded to email. So like, let people control their experience a little bit. There is one more thing as well that I wanted to bring up. So there's the listening-led part of the customer experience that does really well, the kind of targeting and personalization element of it. But the third one is very digital, and this for me is probably the one that got me most excited, which is if you look at, in the last 2 years, what are the directions that the big tech companies are going in with consumers? And they're going in what I would call like a super app direction, meaning over a period of time, we've added so many different applications on our phone. Meta has like Instagram, all these different things. Uber, for example, started off as a taxi app, but is about now you can get your train, your plane, your food on it. It's about trying to, yes, we may have 100 different apps going on in the background doing really complex, powerful things, but the user, the employee, needs to have one simple user experience that pulls all of those apps together in one app. So those are the three things I think that can be added to the blueprint, the retention blueprint, that I think will help.
Now, that's really interesting. I love the way, again, you sort of bring in some of those lessons that we can learn from what's happening on the customer experience side, and particularly on the use of technology. And Luke, that seems like a good point to turn to you, actually. Obviously, coming to you as the digital experience expert here, it'd be good to hear your thoughts on how HR and employee experience leaders can enhance the digital experience a little bit. Expanding on what Kaz has just said there. What strategies can HR employ to supercharge their digital EX initiatives?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Kaz has touched a little bit on what I was gonna start off with, in terms of, basically the marketing 101 lesson, right? Before you you start throwing any type of resource and investment at new technologies, you really have to understand your audience, right? Like, what your employees require, what they desire, in order for them to be engaged and productive and as compliant as possible in the workplace. So yeah, really, that I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be sort of segmenting your workforce into cohorts, and then obviously you're going to have sort of personas within that. Obviously, you can't be as granular as maybe we are in marketing, but you definitely can still sort of look at them as sort of cohorts, and then varying personas within that. And I think this is especially crucial when you're talking about frontline as well, because I think historically what's happened is that there's been a lot of just imposing the same approach to frontline workers, and as I mentioned earlier, what we class as digitally detached workers, as information workers, who are two completely different groups in terms of their, obviously the workplace environment, and the nature of the work, and the way that they can actually access and use information, and what information they actually need to be more engaged and to be more productive. So that really is super important. And if we are thinking more about, frontline as an example here, we know that there's that shift in the workforce from sort of older generations now to sort of millennials, and in particular Gen Z, who are expecting a digital first experience. And yet we see, even in some of our customers, right, when you go to these huge warehouses and factories, they're still using notice boards to communicate vital information, to share information about new job opportunities, learning and development paths. And really, there's been this approach to using unconventional communication channels to create an experience which isn't optimal for an audience that actually can't access those types of technologies and channels during their day-to-day work. So I think, as I said, I can't emphasize enough how important it is by starting with what is having the employee right at the center of your strategy and of your multi-channel experience plan, and then building out from there.
No, that's really good, Lou. And I guess, we've probably spoken a lot on this podcast, in several episodes around how you use technology to personalize experiences for maybe desk workers, traditional workers, if we want to call them that, and because they're using technology all the time in their work, and they're using technology to maybe look at career paths within the organization, or perhaps or looking at training courses they could potentially do to develop their career, or maybe even gigs within the organization that they can maybe do to attach to their main role, looking at talent marketplaces and stuff. But as you said, frontline workers are a little bit different. They're not touching technology on such a regular basis as desk workers. And I think that's where, what you're doing at ScreenCloud comes in a lot, doesn't it, with the digital signage and internal communications that you're doing. So, Luke, maybe explain a little bit about what you're doing at ScreenCloud, I think. So I think it'll be helpful for listeners, but framing that in the sort of sense of, how can organizations effectively use a tool like ScreenCloud, digital signage, to improve employee engagement and communication flow?
Sure. So I think it starts with the science, right? So first of all, we have to understand what is it that engages employees, right? So it's driven by two innate human needs, really, and desires. First of all, it's the connection to purpose, and then it's the connection to each other. I think it was a 2021 McKinsey article that I read recently on how to help your employees find purpose, or watch them leave. So pretty upfront about it. And it was all about sort of defining their individual sense of purpose by their work. So, in order to regain the trust and engagement, it's so crucial for organizations to help employees understand why their work matters, not only to the company, but to the world. And this is only going to increase in importance as Gen Z enter the workplace. And then there's a connection to each other. So again, sort of referencing a recent report, this one was by sort of HubSpot, I think it's a hybrid work report. And it found that most workers actually value good relationships with their colleagues more than a 10% pay rise, which I was pleasantly surprised about. And now we know that hybrid and remote work makes real connection challenging, and we also know that frontline workers feel extremely disconnected from their information worker counterparts. The frontline connection gap, it really is a thing. So if you think, where does that leave us? Communication is more important than ever, and obviously it's got to be effective communication, in terms of how we can bridge these gaps, deepen employees' connections with their leaders and their work and each other. So to do that, you have to, again, understand the neuroscience first. So what type of medium is going to be optimal for the type of information and the audience that I'm sharing it with? So from a digital science perspective, we large screens on our walls, big billboards in Times Square. These mediums have a much higher recall rate than, say, your phone, an app on your phone, or even the screen, the laptop screen that I'm looking at now. So if there is a type of information that you need someone to be able to subliminally consume and recall, then digital signage is much more of an optimal medium than, say, an app or a laptop. So first of all, it's understanding the neuroscience behind those different communication mediums to then inform your sort of channel mix around, okay, well, how am I going to take an omni-channel approach to my comms strategy where I'm using the optimal channel for the audience that I'm looking to target with the information that they need and they want. And then it's looking at the behavioral science. So, you cannot just put a screen up on the wall and start fire hosing information through it and expect that you're going to have the desired impact that we know screens can have. You really have to understand the behavioral science. And we actually did some research with the behavioral science unit at the University of Durham at the beginning of last year, where we explored the understanding of behavioral science insights to inform messaging through screens. And, an example might be the nudge theory, right, where you're using more emotive relationships to nudge behaviors with people in a way that is not intrusive or imposing, but it happens sort of over a more of a prolonged period of time. And obviously screens are great for that, right? In contrast to, say, sending an email with a large document on, or even just hammering push notifications via an app. So I think it's super important to once you understand that those neuroscience and those behavioral science insights to then embrace digital signage in a way that complements an omni-channel comms strategy. And where it works best is where you have an integrated solution. So we've got an integration with Unily, which we're very excited about sort of building out. We've got integrations with Microsoft Teams, Slack. So creating it's really about that ecosystem of communication apps and being able to surface the information via a screen in the right environment at the right time that digital signage lends itself to. It's in particular in the context of a frontline worker environment that we're really seeing sort of take a lead in those sort of deskless workplace environments.
So it's essentially about imparting information and communication, but it resonates more in this way. That's based on the neuroscience research that you've done. But also you can use it to reinforce behaviours, perhaps in frontline workers, but also maybe try and influence behaviour change as well. Is it those types of things that those outcomes that you're looking at?
Yes, absolutely. So if you imagine you're in a factory environment, right, and you're in the break room, the last thing you're going to want to be doing is looking at corporate comms on an app or on the internet at that point in time, right? But if there was information on the screen, for example, reward and recognition, or it was letting you know about some new career opportunities, then obviously that's something that is intrinsically valuable to those individuals at that time. Then you move out onto the factory floor and you're there with your machinery and you have a screen showing you real-time insights of how efficient you've been within the last hour. Then you're again providing the right information to allow that individual to adapt and take more of a data-driven approach to their work that they wouldn't have been otherwise able to do. So there's different types of information that sort of sit in increasing engagement, increasing productivity, and increasing compliance. If you think about sort of the health and safety, that you should be using in different types of environments within that workplace. Obviously, we're talking about the frontline workplace here, but also in terms of an office environment as well. Screens can also play a fundamental role in creating a better experience within the office. Reward and recognition is a big one, right? And whether you're an information worker or a frontline worker. We know that recognition has, I think it's around 80% increases employees' satisfaction, job satisfaction. So the medium of a screen is a way of actually sharing that information in a way that people will consciously or otherwise be able to sort of take that in, and it will have an influence on how they feel, and ultimately, in some instances, be able to take action on that when it's more health and safety messaging, etc.
What's really cool about what Luke was saying is that that whole omni-channel strategy is not we're not adding channels for the sake of channels. This is trying to looking at what marketers are doing, which they have like a rule of 7, which is if you want someone to take action on something, that person needs to have seen it at least 7 times to take action on it. And so the channels like signage are a big part of ensuring that employees see things a right amount of times in order to take action on it. So whether that's benefits enrollment or whatever it may be, you need to understand it's not just one email, it's not just one thing shown on the signage, it's a journey that's mapped out, so you're constantly allowing the employee to see it before they take action on it.
No, it's really interesting, and in many respects, it's HR helping drive the organisation towards digital transformation, I guess, and priming the workforce to work with technology and AI. And I love that kind of rule of 7, because it's a different medium in which to impart that information and try and drive the action that you're trying to drive. With that, we know that, again, we touched on this at the start, HR's probably behind other business functions when it comes to immersing themselves in these types of technology and using data and analytics. Where do you feel HR professionals need to upskill themselves to manage this transition effectively? And Kaz, I'll come to you first, and then Luke, you can chip in as well.
Yeah. So what I would say is the data. I'll probably be a little bit controversial on this. The data is really important, but it's like how are we translating that information, that data that we have, into understanding our employees? And I know we've touched on like the journeys, the personas. But where I've seen some people create personas and I've then looked back at them, they look like they've been ChatGPT generated. They're ideas of employees that, yes, okay, they start at this time and finish at that time, but does it really represent who that employee is? Like the marketing personas, they understand what gets someone out of bed in the morning, when they get out of bed, what time they go to bed, what goes on around the interactions that they have in the day, what their personality types are, what's the lens that they see the world through, what's their perspective. And so the skill I would say is work out how that data maps onto understanding your employees. So it's not just about creating these 2D ChatGPT generated employees like, woohoo, we've got personas. It's, does this actually represent a modern employee, understand their priorities, their personality type, that sort of thing, so that we know how to engage them. Because again, the value of those personas is understanding what makes them tick. And if you've got a journey for your persona and it starts at 9 and it finishes at 5, that's not representative of that person.
So basically, take time to understand people, understand the different personas, maybe test a little bit.
Yeah, I would say maybe when it comes also like I guess the next step of that is, once you've built out those personas, is to then look at customer journey mapping and try and take from that customer journey mapping what's that kind of employee journey mapping, work out the friction points and where you can implement technology, or where you can implement communications, or where you can have manual interventions to help that journey drive the action that you want. But it's not just about persona done, tick. Yes, we've created a average day in the life, tick. This represents the sort of person. This represents the type of employees that we have. These are the journeys that they're going on. These are the pain points, the points of digital friction, or whatever it may be, that we can then intervene in to then help the experience and help the employee do what they need to do and do their job.
No, really good. And Luke, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to not get too fixated on the technology. I think HR has gone through arguably one of the quickest transformations that we've seen. Obviously, since the onset of the pandemic, that really accelerated things. And I think there's been a lot of technology that's been thrown at, well, a lot more towards information workers. But that, we know, we're seeing issues around digital friction and reciprocity debt when it comes to the overwhelming amount of technology that we have at our fingertips now. I think on average, information workers have 6 workplace communication apps that we're having to sort of balance at the same time. So I think taking a step back and as Kaz said, understanding your audience, and then obviously understanding what is the objective of this communication that I'm looking to push to this audience, and if it's not actually something that's going to be valuable and beneficial to them, then just don't do it, right? So it's that deep understanding which will come through obviously the being able to track and monitor and experiment, as I mentioned earlier, but also just getting back to more closing that feedback loop in a way where you can actually have conversations with your different cohorts within the business, and once you've got that feedback loop established, I think you'll continuously learn, because as I say, this is going to be ever evolving, right? As we see more and more Gen Zs come into the workplace, and just the way that the global landscape, this is not something that we can sort of set up now and it will just run, like clockwork for the next 5 years. And also speak to your marketing peers in the organization. There are obvious nuances, right, between what marketing does when it comes to prospects and customers, and what HR professionals are responsible for when it comes to employees. But there are a lot of similarities there, and we've been through it. We know we've got a lot of the technologies that provide us with the sort of insights that HR and internal comms leaders will need to help inform their strategies, processes, and the like. So have those conversations and learn from your peers in a way that will hopefully give you some more ideas how you can maybe apply some of that learning in the context of your role with owning your employee audience.
Yeah, no, very good, very good. Well, we're approaching the end of the discussion. This is the penultimate question before we get onto the question of the series. So I think it's a good opportunity to kind of wrap up and summarize some of the key takeaways for listeners. So Kaz, coming to you first, what are the key takeaways you'd like for our listeners to take home from our discussion today?
Yeah, I'd say for me, what would be cool if people took away from it is that understand that the things that are engaging, activating employees are ultimately the things that are engaging and igniting them in their personal lives, and understand that you are also, as an employer, you're a person. Maybe look at what is igniting you, what are you engaging with, and work out that there isn't this like magical divide that when someone comes into the workplace that everything changes, whether that's the tech, whether that's the content and comms, whether that's the processes and things like that. It's not like a clear line. So I would say, I hope that they've taken away that there are some really cool, exciting concepts that come from marketing, that come from consumer experience, that sort of thing that can be applied to your roles in HR too.
Yeah, very good. And Luke, what would be the key takeaways that you'd like listeners to take away with them?
Sure. So I think the first one would be, you've got to be focused on an omni-channel, not a multi-channel digital experience, right? So creating that omni-channel experience for your workforce, by doing so, you'll allow your employees to have their preferred place to consume and engage with the information they want and need. And we know that in turn, this will help, reduce digital friction, reciprocity debt for your information workers, but also help close that frontline gap, which is a real issue and challenge at the moment. Giving more optimal channels for that crucial subset of the workforce to access the information they're currently unable to access. And the second takeaway, which is going to be a bit of a promo for ScreenCloud, actually, and something I wish I mentioned earlier. I meant to mention earlier. We were just about to publish a really interesting piece of research that we commissioned with Google Chrome OS, who we're a partner with, where we researched 2,400 respondents, 1,200 decision makers, 1,200 frontline employees across manufacturing, logistics, supply chain, and construction in the US and UK territories. And this research found that 3 in 5 frontline workers believe that the information that is shared on their workplace screens helps them to become more engaged with the wider business. So that was 61%. 59% think that they become more productive, and 62% say they become more data literate. And that research really signifies the immense impact that access to the information has on workplace engagement and productivity. So, get a better understanding, as I say, of the neuroscience, the behavioral science that underpins the communication mediums and channels that you're using.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that research, Luke. We can certainly put the link to that in the show notes for listeners who want to dig in a little bit further. So now finally to the question of the series. So this is one that we're asking everyone in this series, which ScreenCloud are kindly sponsoring. So Kaz, starting with you, is probably the question that we're hearing a lot at the moment. How will AI transform the role of HR?
Yeah, so you're right. It seems to be the word or the term on everyone's lips at the moment. I was at the Gartner conference a couple of months ago, and it seemed like every session and everything had AI in it. I'd say looking at it from the HR lens is it's not just AI for the sake of AI. Have a look at what are the genuine gaps that we have, and how can it help us. So I would say look at how it can help us create content. If there's a bit of a content deficit, how can it help us target that stuff? We've created those cool personas. Can it help us personalize that and make it more relevant to people? That's what I would say. I'd say also, generally speaking, when you've created that content, you've made it more relevant. Can it help with things like accessibility as well? Looking at all the things like, have we been transcribing our videos so that people can follow them, or podcasts or things like that, whatever it may be. So for me, it would be look at where there are gaps, and can we use AI to create more better, relevant content that's more accessible to people across the organization, so that we get to do the more people side of the function.
No, very good. And Luke, same question. How will AI transform the role of HR?
Cool. So yeah, I think I'll stay on the same theme of sort of improving that employee experience for this question. And I think AI is going to be instrumental in helping to personalize the digital employee experience and ultimately sort of drive that engagement. So I think a real use case is using AI to analyze the data, employee behavior data, employee sentiment and feedback, and then, identify those patterns that will be leading indicators of engagement levels, etc. And then, use those insights to proactively address any issues and, to tailor your strategies to individual needs to ultimately prevent, disengagement and employee turnover. So yeah, I think that probably would be something I foresee becoming increasingly instrumental from an AI perspective.
Some great thoughts from both of you there. So last thing for me to say is thank you, Luke. Thank you, Kaz, for being guests on the Digital HR Leaders podcast. So Luke, maybe starting with you this time, can you let listeners know how they can get in touch with you on social media, find out more about ScreenCloud?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, search my name and you'll find me on LinkedIn, and ScreenCloud.com to learn more about how digital signage can help you create a more engaged, productive, and compliant workforce. And as you said, David, I'll kindly share that research that we're publishing week after next with you, so that your listeners can also get their hands on that as well.
Great. And Kaz, thank you very much as well. How can listeners stay in touch with you? Maybe find out more about the research that you're doing, and also find out about Unily as well.
Of course, yeah. And thanks for having me, David. So I'm quite prolific on LinkedIn. So I post I do a lot of trends and predictions. And I also post the odd controversial opinion. So if that's your thing, at Kaz Hassan. I also have a YouTube channel. I'm a very video medium person. So if anyone's interested in seeing explainers of our employee retention report, for example, I do my kind of 3 takeaways from that. And yeah, on Unily.com, we've got that full employee retention report with all the data, what employee experience leaders are prioritizing, looking deeper at the digital super apps concept as well. So on Unily.com, as well as at Kaz Hassan on the main socials.
That's great. And we'll put links to your social profiles in the show notes as well. So Kaz, Luke, thank you very much for being guests on the Digital HR Leaders podcast today. Enjoy the rest of your days, and we'll speak soon. In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.